The X-Zone Radio and TV show is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio and TV show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, or employees.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome to the X-Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X-Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X-Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and our growing family of broadcast affiliates right around the world. Now, if you'd like to send an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on any social media that you can think of, I'm talking about Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, and the list goes on and on and on. One simple address, X-Zone Radio TV, and our website is www.xzoneradiotv.com. X-Zone Nation, this is one show I was looking forward to, because it's about time that we hold these people accountable. And I'm talking about the televangelists. You know, those people who cry because they want to help you. They want you to have they want you to have this special water that has a special gift that'll heal you. They have that piece of cloth that will make everything just so super for you. But at a cost. At a cost. You know, it's a business to them. You know, and our researchers came up with some very fascinating information for this show. For example, which evangelist said Eve gave birth to Cain and Abel out of her side, taught that Adam could fly, and believes God, and believes the Godhead is actually 9, count them, 9 entities. This guy is still on the TV show, and people actually believe in him and send them money. Millions. And I'm talking about the one and only Benny Hinn. Now, which televangelist teaches that Jesus was rich and the apostles were successful businessmen with plenty of money? Well, that was Fred Price, of course. Now, there was a real one here that I just had to laugh. Oh, here. Jonathan Bell, who's another televangelist, said, if you're an intellect, you'll probably go to hell for it. And here's a good one. Who felt he had to go to a psychiatrist to find out whether or not he was a homosexual? Well, if I was married to Tammy Faye Baker, I'd question the same thing too. That was Jim Baker.
That would cause all sorts of shuddering thoughts.
Yeah, you know, like, I was thinking about putting an Oral Roberts joke in there, but I'm not going to.
There are plenty of them.
My guest this hour is the one and only Dr. Don K Preston. And Don, welcome back to the X-Zone. Great having you with us again tonight.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you.
I've got to tell you something, Don. You were on the show with us when? Last week? The week before?
About 2 weeks ago, I believe.
We had a great time. Wonderful discussion. And you mentioned something about televangelists and the negative side and a light went on. We've got to do a show, and here we are tonight, X-Zone Nation. We're talking about televangelists, and it seems that anybody can become a televangelist, whether or not you're a member of the clergy or not. And who monitors this stuff, Don?
Well, in the modern world that we live in, of course, there are a few organizations, interdenominational organizations, that monitor the financial status, the financial doings of televangelisms. But they basically have no clout. They basically have no, to use a term, enforcement authority. They just really kind of do some auditing and say, oh, look what's going on over here. And they leave it up to the public, the Christian public, to make up their minds whether or not what they're reporting is any good. Now, the one, shall we say, positive to that is that the organizations that they monitor have to voluntarily join. And so it's one of those type of things that they can actually brag about, and they can say, look, we voluntarily joined this auditing firm so that our finances are out there for the world to see. Well, that's all fine and good. It sounds real great. Unfortunately, the reality of it is if you don't report everything that you're doing, then everything that you're doing can't be audited.
All right, stand by, Don. You and I have to take a 2-minute commercial break. We'll be right back. Exonation. Dr. Don K. Preston is our special guest. We're talking about televangelists this hour here in the X Zone. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away. The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howe will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com. Oh, heavens to Betsy. Welcome back, Exonation. My name is Rob McConnell. Dr. Don K. Preston is our special guest, and we're talking about televangelists this hour here in the Exo. Now, before I get back to the good doctor, there's Kenneth Copeland, who is a televangelist or an evangelist, has his own Worse Than B movies and charges $930 for his Bible tape, his Bible course tapes. Let me see. Gene Scott, he's a preacher, proudly displayed himself in bed with a bevy of Playboy playmates. Here, Jan Crouch. First miracle witnessed was the healing of a pet chicken. I'm not making this up. This is too stupid to make up. And this is the final one, Don. Let me see. Benny Hinn wishes he could have a Holy Ghost machine gun so he could kill his enemies.
I personally witnessed on one program one night when Benny Hinn was on stage, and I have followed his ministry for years, but I must confess the very first report there of his aberrant beliefs caught me by surprise. Even though I followed him for years, I didn't realize that he believed in those really, really far out things. So you just live and learn.
I guess.
But I personally witnessed him one night on stage, and he was talking about people that are going to get the Holy Spirit and they're going to get healed. Mm-hmm. And he took his fist as if he were shooting craps, blew in his hand as if he were going to throw the dice, and threw the Holy Spirit out on the audience. Now, what was really amazing and what was funny, the cameraman wasn't on top of his job, and he panned the audience. There was one gentleman in the audience that obviously was completely and totally turned off by it, standing there with arms folded, with a frown on his face, shaking his head like this is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. And I'm going, that's my kind of guy right there.
Maybe the cameraman did his job.
maybe he did on second thought.
Yeah.
But he immediately obviously realized that this guy didn't need to be on Benny Hinn's show, being the face of what was going on. But I just could not sit and watch that and think that good, honest people could believe what they were witnessing. And yet, unfortunately, it is happening every week. Every night that he's on, good and honest people are being deceived by his aberrant doctrines and obviously his would-be claims or his claims to healing and what have you. It's just such a sad testimony to the gullibility. I'm not trying to be unkind. I'm not trying to be harsh. Mm-hmm. But it is just simply a fact. Far too many people are far too gullible. They have a whole lot of wishful theological thinking. Many people are simply desperate to find some kind of relief from the desperation of their lives. And so they'll reach out, they'll grab onto anything that sounds maybe sort of kind of hope so might be true.
And in one respect, you really can't blame them because they're looking at these people as preachers, preaching the Word of God, preaching what they believe in. So they have a natural tendency to believe in these people. Look at how many people have been taken in by the Catholic Church and the little boy syndrome that they all have.
Absolutely.
So I my heart goes out to these people in one respect, but if you keep on sending in all that money, and I've heard horror stories, Don, about people who have, who've sent in their life savings to these televangelists and to these building of this city, paying so much for a brick in a building. And like, my God, I thought in order to get to heaven, you just had to be a good person, do unto others. And, follow the 10 Commandments. I didn't know that you had to empty out your bank account into one of his representatives here.
Well, what you mentioned there, I have actually counseled people who have lost their life savings, who have contributed to these different elements, whether it be a prophetic fiasco or whether it be a faith healing ministry or what have you. I personally have counseled with people in those situations, tried to help them to see that they were, in fact, the victim of fraud.
That's right.
I consider it fraud.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important to understand a lot of the psyche that goes on. And you mentioned that you have a great deal of sympathy, and I do as well.
Yeah.
But there is a very powerful psychological element that goes on. If a man stands up and tells you, and he sounds so convincing, so powerful, so eloquent, he stands up and tells you, I was driving down the road, and a voice just as audible as I'm speaking right now spoke to me and said, Brother John, Brother Don, Brother Rob, whatever, here's what I want you to do. And if this powerful theological figure says, I saw a vision of Jesus that was 900 feet tall.
Oh, that sounds like something I heard about. Who was it? Oral Roberts?
Oral Roberts, right here in Oklahoma, who told him, if you do not raise, I'm trying to remember the exact amount. Seems like it was $11 million. I may be wrong on the exact figure, but it was several $1 million. But he said, if you do not raise this multiple $1 million in the next 30 days or however long it was, I'm going to take you home. Well, Oral Roberts gets on national TV naturally and says, I saw this vision of Jesus. He was 900 feet tall. Well, who's going to argue with a 900-foot tall Jesus?
What?
And who's going to argue with somebody who says he saw that? Well, I'm sorry. My mentality is I'd like to see some proof of this.
Exactly.
What is your evidence that you saw this Jesus who was 900 feet tall? And this raises another of the psychological elements. Number one is the fact that this man claims that God spoke directly to him and that he is now a spokesman for God. Secondarily, people are being indoctrinated, and I've studied with literally hundreds, perhaps thousands of people who have told me this themselves personally about what they are being taught, how they are being indoctrinated. To question, to go to a preacher who says, the Lord spoke to me and said, you got to give me your money, to actually challenge that person and say, I need some proof.
Right.
Is almost the unforgivable sin of blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. Well, nobody wants to commit a sin for which they can't be forgiven, which means they can never go to heaven, no matter how much faith they have, no matter how much they love the Lord. If they dare to question the validity, the reality, and the truth of the claims being made, well, they're just automatically a sinner doomed to hell.
Wow.
Well, that's not a biblical view of things. And as a matter of fact, when Jesus himself stood in front of an unbelieving, antagonistic crowd that really, really wanted to kill him even at that time, and in the book of John chapter 10, and he said, don't believe me for my word's sake. Believe me for my works. If I don't do the works that my Father gave me to do, then don't believe me. Well, okay, if Jesus himself said, put me to the test, then if I have a right to test the words and the works of Jesus, I most assuredly have a right today to test the claims of Benny Hinn, Grant Jeffrey, Hal Lindsey, or whoever else wants to pop up on the scene and say, I speak for the Lord.
I can't argue with you. I agree with you 100%.
I would go on. I'll tell a little story here from my personal experience because, Rob, this has been an area of investigation for most of my ministry life. I have studied Bible prophecy and done comparative studies of what the different religions believe in the field of last things. But I've also been deeply, deeply involved in the study of television ministries and the claims of the so-called healers and miracle workers and what have you. And I was actually preaching for a week. We used to call them gospel meetings and what have you, And one night after the service, a bunch of us standing around talking. Gentleman walked up, and he was obviously pretty unhappy with something I had said and just kind of challenged me right offhand. And I said, well, sir, I tell you what, are you telling me that you can actually heal? He said, absolutely. I said, there's a hospital just down the road. Let's go down there, you and me and whoever else wants to come along, and let's find their cancer ward.
Yeah.
Let's find the floor where their terminally ill patients are. Yeah. You clean it out tonight, and I will be your follower. I will proclaim your gospel from then on. He said, well, you're just tempting me. You're tempting the Lord. No, I said, no. I'm doing precisely what the Bible says to do. Paul was being challenged by some at the church at Corinth, church he established. They were claiming to be apostles. An apostle could perform miracles, according to Paul himself. And Paul said that he was getting ready to travel back to Corinth, and he said, I'm going to know not the words, but the power also of those who claim to be somewhat. So I told this gentleman, I said, look, if the Apostle Paul felt that it was right when people were claiming to be apostles to have the miracle-working power, and Paul said, okay, and I'll just express this in good Oklahoma language, either put up or shut up. And I said, I'm doing exactly what John said to do. Don't believe every spirit, test the spirits. Many false prophets going out in the world. So I said, you claim to have the miracle-working power. I'm asking you, verify that for me, and I will preach it myself. Oh, no. Well, we continued to talk. And finally, I just challenged him again because he went a little farther in his claims and ability. And I said, can you literally raise the dead? He claimed he could.
Oh, brother.
Oh, he did. Well, when I hit him with that challenge, he kind of took about a half step back, a little bit stunned. Even though he had affirmed that he could, his wife immediately said, he most assuredly can.
All right, you and I have to take a commercial break. This is a great cliffhanger. Exo Nation, the one and only Dr. Don K. Preston is our very special guest this hour here in the X Zone. Gotta love him. Gotta love him. Reminds me of all the people who come on this show, Don, who say that they're intuitive healers, they're this kind of healer, and like I've asked them myself, like you asked that man, well, do you go to the hospitals and heal the sick? Well, it doesn't work that way. Don, you and I will be back. Don't go away. A witch doctor's power and his ancient tribal ways cruelly collide with the force and authority of modern Africa. Africa is viewed through myriad eyes. You will never forget these characters. A young girl forced to endure a painful, cruel, and antiquated tribal custom. The sole survivor of a vicious tribal massacre. A nun who endures physical assault that compels her to question her faith. A deprived, disadvantaged schoolgirl who is infected with HIV. The translucent soul of a murdered friend. Welcome to Africa's Unfinished Symphony. While the tale of South Africa in the wake of World War II is riveting, violent, and cruel, it is also brimming with stories of kindness, compassion, and courage. Africa's Unfinished Symphony highlights commanding characters who not only bring haunting racial clashes to life, but also convey the intense conflicts that existed between archaic customs and modern influences. You will be captivated as you follow the convoluted path of Farida, of the ancients battling to become Bertha of the modern world. But are the outcomes of her struggle the best results for her and her beloved Africa? Africa's Unfinished Symphony will immerse you in historic African themes that will jolt you out of complacency and into compassion. For more information on how you can get your very own copy of Africa's Unfinished Symphony, visit www.luciamann.com. That's www.luciamann.com.
This is the X Zone Radio TV show with Rob McConnell on the X Zone Broadcast Network and our worldwide family of broadcast affiliates. If you have a question for Rob McConnell or his guest, or if you've had a paranormal experience, call toll-free 1-800-610-7035 extension 0 or email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, our one address is X Zone Radio TV.
Welcome back, everyone. Dr. Don K. Preston is our very special guest this hour. We're talking about phony balonies. I'm talking about televangelists. Well, not all of them. I shouldn't say that. The majority of them. Mind you, the current way that society looks at televangelists actually goes to, let me see, I think it was December of 1980. Room number 538 of the Sheraton Sand Key Resort in Clearwater, Florida. That will go down in history, my friends, not only for the view or ambience, but rather for the historic union which took place in that very room. It is there that, in December of 1980, an attractive 20-something church secretary named Jessica Hahn got to know Jim Bakker and John Wesley Fletcher in a biblical sense, if you know what I mean. Nod, nod, nudge, nudge. And that close encounter of the threesome kind, not the close encounter of the third kind that we usually talk about here, but that actually defined American televangelism. The ambitious, high-living, wild-spending Bakker has become an American icon. And you know what? Then we had the falling of grace from Jimmy Swaggart, who cried on TV that he had sinned and that he would sin no more. And, you know, he cried the blues and he played the piano and he did it again. Like, come on. Oh, my heavens. First of all, Don, always great talking to you, my friend. So tell me, as a real member of the clergy, you know, you've got your doctorate, you've gone through you've been a pastor, you've counseled people, you know, you counsel people who have been taken in by these charlatans. How do you feel about the lack of control or the lack of responsibility that these televangelists seem to just, you know, that doesn't affect me because I'm on God's team. You know,
yeah, they seem to snub their nose, literally,
yeah.
at their own membership, at their own followers. I have a very, very negative feeling toward the huge majority of televangelists, the ones that I watch, the ones that I have followed, the ones that I've, shall we say, monitored. And the trouble about it is, number one, there is no real system of accountability. The only thing that people can do, and this is what I urge people all of the time to do. Number one, be willing to study and to be willing to think for yourself. Do not turn on that television or radio, as the case may be, and say, oh, he says he's a spokesman for God. Oh, my goodness gracious, I have to do what he says. You know, in the Bible, when someone no less than the Apostle Paul himself went into the Jewish synagogue and said, guess what, guys, I got news for you. All of our hopes and expectations about the Messiah, coming a Messiah, have come true in a man named Jesus. And the folks at Berea were said to be more noble, even more noble than the ones in Thessalonica. And Paul wrote two letters to the folks at Thessalonica, telling how much he loved them and what have you. But Luke tells us that the folks at Berea were even more noble than the folks at Thessalonica because they studied what Paul said, compared it with the scriptures to see whether or not it was true.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't just say, oh, well, Brother Paul said it was true. Must be true. And it gets back to this thing, Rob, that you don't have to believe a man when he says, God spoke to me in the shower last night.
Yeah.
What is your evidence? And, you know, Paul even said, if any man thinks himself to be a prophet, thinks himself to be spiritual, and of course he was basically saying, if a man claims he's a prophet, if a man claims he speaks for God, let him acknowledge that the things that I write to you, these are the commandments of God. He wrote, and what he was saying is, you know, if what he says doesn't match up with what I'm writing, then he's not a prophet. He's not a spokesman for God. And that gets back to the being willing to think, being willing to study for ourselves. But this, I really think, people ask me all of the time, Rob, what's one of the greatest challenges that I, in my personal ministry, face in trying to correct the wrong views about eschatology? And I said, well, number one, it's ignorance. Number two, it's apathy. And number three, it's apathy about being ignorant. And it's a fatal mix. People don't know their Bible anymore. And they want to leave it up to the preacher, their pastor, to say, I've studied the Bible. Here's what it says. Now, let's face it, you know, preachers are granted the time because of their ministerial salaries. Okay, we're granted the time to study more than most people.
Right. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, it just makes sense. I mean, a man's having to spend 9 to 5 or work 12 hours a day just to put food on the table,
Yeah.
and it's getting worse all the time. Uh, I mean, I'm just tremendously blessed myself. I get to the office about 4 o'clock of a morning. I begin my study, my research, my prayer, and devotional, what have you. I understand most people don't have that opportunity. They don't get paid to study the Word of God, to research and to understand. I understand that. That does not alleviate them from some responsibility in examining, searching, studying, and thinking for themselves.
Whatever happened to the good old days when, you had a family Bible that was in a very special place in the house? Or whatever happened to the good old days where you'd go to school and the first lesson of the day would be scriptures? You'd get out the hymn book, you'd sing hymns. Now, I didn't go to any special school. I went to public school. But it seems that religion was a very important part of our day. And yet today, it's nothing.
Well, and of course the secular humanists have they have been the architects of this new society that we're living in around the world, not only in America but in Canada, Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Great Britain to speak a couple of years ago. I got to go to St. Paul's Cathedral, which is now really basically nothing more than a museum.
Oh, Lord.
It's an unbelievably beautiful museum. But in speaking to the local priest
Mm-hmm.
that minister there, I said, "Do you actually have services here?" And he said, "Oh, somewhat." But he said, "Really, it's nothing formal." And they had a little bitty, tiny, roped off area in this absolutely humongous cathedral. And they had a few folding chairs set right out there in the middle. And he said, "This is where we hold our services right here." Now, this cathedral would literally hold thousands of people, and they put up a few folding chairs. There may have been 20 or 30 folding chairs out there in this little cordoned-off area. Lots of studies reveal 2 to 3% of the people in Britain go to church anymore. Religion in Great Britain is essentially dead as far as Christianity is concerned. Of course, they've got a tremendously fast-growing Islamic community over there.
Everywhere does.
Everywhere, yeah. And they're taking over. They've publicly stated they're going to take over Great Britain, mm-hmm. and what have you. But back more specifically to your question, America has become more secularized. Canada has become more secularized because we've taken religion out of the public venue. How many times have we heard people say, "Look, it's just fine if you're a Christian, just keep it to yourself"? Well, I'm sorry, that's not the nature of true Christianity.
Well, my question is, if everyone else has their right to practice the religion of their choice, why is it that you can't say Merry Christmas anymore? You can't say Happy Easter anymore. How come you can't have a Christmas tree anymore? Give me a break. Hey, if you don't like the way the country's run, where the plane landed, it also takes off from.
Absolutely. And furthermore, as I often like to remind people here in America, the First Amendment gives us the right to freedom of speech. It does not give us the freedom from being offended by what someone says, but it means that they have a right to say it, and I will defend their right to say it. I may not like what they have to say. So that gets to this issue that you're talking about. I have a right to say Merry Christmas, folks.
Darn tootin'.
And I have a right to celebrate Christmas should I desire, do that and put up a tree. I'm kind of a bah humbug type of guy, not because of any religious or theological reasons. But my wife says I'm a Scrooge when it comes to Christmas. But, all that, it gets back to the secularization. And I have to tell you this. Back to our topic here, more specifically. I encounter so many people who are so disillusioned because, number one, they gave their fortunes away and they didn't get rich because, in spite of the health and wealth public preaching of the televangelists, the only people getting wealthy are the televangelists.
Plus, they have one heck of a payroll.
oh my goodness gracious, do they ever? And you mentioned a while ago at the very intro to the program, someone who said Jesus and his apostles were wealthy. Well, that's just a blatant lie.
Sure it is.
The Son of Man does not have anywhere to lay his head. Well, if I'm a pretty wealthy dude, I think I'm going to have some place to lay my head.
Well, that reminds me, and I talked to you about this off air, that we just completed a video as a public service announcement for the homeless people, because God bless them. No matter what brought them to that point, nobody in my view should be homeless. Nobody should be hungry. We called the video Jesus was homeless too. We were told that we couldn't use that title because it wasn't politically correct.
Once again, why do I not have the right to speak of Jesus?
Yeah.
Why do I not have a right to express that which I believe in? I mean, after all, atheists are out there more and more speaking openly, blatantly, militantly what they don't believe in. So why don't I have a right to say what I do believe? Why is it politically correct not to speak of Jesus and religious conviction, but all of a sudden it's wrong to say, here's what I believe? After all, Paul said, I believe, therefore I speak. In other words, I as an individual, as a human being, I'm going to talk about the things that I believe in, the things that are important to me. So if I live in a country in which there's at least ostensibly the freedom of expression, then allow me that freedom. I heard a commentator on television not long ago saying, and he was very eloquent about it, he was not a Christian. He was, as a matter of fact, a Jew. But he said, you know what? I'm not offended when a Christian tells me Merry Christmas, because I may say to him Happy Hanukkah.
Exactly.
And I hope that he doesn't get offended. We each have our mutual beliefs and convictions in these areas, but what are we doing? We're each wishing the other goodwill. So what's wrong?
Exactly.
What's the problem here?
There is no problem. I was raised in a part of Montreal that was multicultural. We had, we had the Greek community, the Italian community, the Jewish community, the Irish community, all these little communities in that one part of Montreal called Park Extension. We all went to school together. We learned together, and it was the richest education anyone could have ever got, because you got to learn about the other cultures. You became part of the other families. You celebrated their holidays. You understood their, what was going on in their culture. And they got to know your culture. And they spent holidays with you. There was an open exchange, open communication. And this is what's lacking in the world today.
And because of mutual respect, because of the relationships that were there, you could each express your convictions and your beliefs. You may not agree with each other, but hey, you were still friends.
Exactly.
You were still neighbors. You lived with mutual respect with each other, and you went about your business.
And you know what? Those were the happiest days of my life because of all these friends I had back then, and the different cultures and the different ways of doing things, and the way that you could actually learn from each other. They celebrated Hanukkah, Rosh Hashanah. We found out what it was about, and we celebrated it along with them as well. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, it's a matter, to return to something I mentioned a moment ago, there's so much disillusionment, even in the Christian community, over the charlatans. So many people have lost their faith over the charlatans, whether that be because of prophetic failures. The Harold Camping fiasco comes to mind immediately. The Harold Camping, oh my goodness gracious, Hal Lindsey, and on it goes. Or whether it be back to the failure of these so-called healers who never deliver on their promises. And we'll discuss this on the other side of the break about the constant failures.
All right, stand by, Don. You and I have to take our 2-minute commercial, 4-minute break here, and we'll be back as we continue this very interesting conversation I'm having with my good friend Dr. Don K Preston here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't you dare go away. If you enjoy reading a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love From Out of the Woodwork by William S. Peckham. Sean Kennedy, a Toronto contractor, buys derelict houses, guts them, and turns them into multi-family dwellings. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, a century house in ruins, and starts the renovation, the house fights back. He is visited by ghosts of owners past. His visions are triggered by touching an oak mantle, reading a faded letter, opening an old locket, or opening a brand new casket in the basement. These visions will take you on a trip across southern Ontario from Niagara Falls to Toronto to Kingston. From Out of the Woodwork is now available in paperback and on your favorite electronic reader. To order your copy of From Out of the Woodwork, go to www.williamspeckham.com. That's www.williamspeckham.com.
Telling me that you'll be true. Lies, lies, that's all I ever get from you. Tears, tears, I shed a million tears for you. Tears, tears, and now you're loving someone new. Someday I'm gonna be happy, but I don't know when just now.
Exonation, Dr. Don K Preston is our special guest. We're talking about fraudulent televangelists. And here's something that a judge said to Jim Whittington. Let me see. This was during the sentencing of the televangelist to 10 years in prison for money laundering, mail fraud, conspiracy, and interstate transportation of stolen property. The judge said, and this is a quote, "You picked the last flake of flesh from the carcasses of the widows you defrauded."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Well, history, modern history and older history, is replete with examples of the abuse of the name pastor, preacher, evangelist. Example after example after example of men. You've already named Jim Baker, Swaggart. I know personally ministers who have been guilty of, quote, moral indiscretion, unquote. I know ministers who have been guilty of financial fraud. And that is such a tremendously debilitating thing for the community of believers. And what I urge people, and I mentioned a while ago of how I've counseled people who have been so disillusioned, who have lost tremendous financial abilities as a result of trusting the TV evangelist. And what I tell people, number one, is they have to put their faith in the Lord, not in men. Number two, they have to learn more about the will of God, what the will of God really is. And going back to what I said a while ago, it takes some time and it takes some study to know what the Bible really teaches. I mean, you've already mentioned these aberrant beliefs, for instance, of Benny Hinn and believing all these absolutely weird, far-out things that cannot be found anywhere at all on the pages of the Bible. But, if the person is sitting there, they're not even opening their Bible, they're not asking, is this preacher taking these verses out of context? Is he applying them properly? Well, you know what? Those who don't ask questions are bound to fall for something.
But I think the problem here, Don, is that people are taught that they are the sheep and the pastor, the minister, the reverend, the priest is the shepherd.
This is precisely the problem that I was getting at a while ago when I said many of these televangelists get up there and they say, God spoke to me. And you don't dare question
their authority.
Their authority.
Yeah.
I was visiting with a woman one time and we were sharing some thoughts about the Bible. And I said, I'd love to study the Bible with you. And she said, oh, no, I don't need to study the Bible. My priest studies the Bible for me and tells me what to believe. Well, that's a Catholic lady, bless her heart, but that's the way she's been taught. You do not challenge the word of the priest.
Well, because
it may not be as overt in non-Catholic churches, but it's certainly there.
Don, we have to say so long again for tonight. I have to have you back on in a couple of weeks. I thoroughly enjoy talking to you. I know that you get a lot of our listeners thinking.
Great.
And what's the website you'd like our listeners to go to?
Just go to donkpreston.com. Real simple, donkpreston.com.
And Don will be back with us in a couple of weeks, X-Zone Nation. Don, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing. And as always, I look forward to the next time you and I meet here in the X-Zone.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure.
Good night, my friend. Once again, X-Zone Nation, Don K. Preston has been my guest this hour, and we'll be back on the other side of this news break as we continue here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away.